There we go. Okay, hi and welcome to Choose Agape. Hang on. Well, okay. Hi, I'm really pleased to be joined today by Father Joshua Waltz, who is an American Catholic priest and vocations director in Bismarck, North Dakota. I got that right.
You did.
Thank
you. Get it. I'm not vocation director anymore. I just I did that about 3 years ago. So I've been a pastor at for us a fairly large church, about 1,200 families, and then we also have a school and pre-K. So, and we just started at a high school.
Oh wow. Okay, that is a good thing. That's a much needed thing, really, isn't it?
Well,
good
it's all
Catholic education.
It's all we're trying to do, like Montessori based education. And running that from pre-K children's house all the way to high school. And so once you get to high school, we kind of mix in a little bit of the John Henry Newman. He knew a little bit more about, adolescence and when they get to that age. And so, but Dr. Montessori was just, there's just no one better for children as far as I'm concerned. And she's Catholic. It's like, it's our brand, Yeah. We don't have to follow the public system. Like, we have our own brand already, and it's amazing.
Yeah. There's some real problems in education, I think, at the moment. I came across. So how I know of you is because I teach in a Catholic school over here. So over here we have publicly funded Catholic schools still. For how long, I don't know, but at the moment, because the pressure is immense, the cultural pressure, and so we teach about vocation, and I came across your vocation story on YouTube, and it's fantastic. And what's great about it is because you're just an ordinary guy who you're just sharing your story, and you talk about these moments of grace that just penetrate your life, these little glimpses that have brought you to where you are, and then I thought you were still vocations director. So I was going to maybe start by asking you about why you think there's a shortage of priests and what can be done about that.
Yeah, I mean, so where we are, we actually have an overwhelming surplus of priests. So when I was vocation director, we had like 29 guys in the seminary, and that's huge for our diocese. We only have 60,000 Catholics. And so to have almost 30 guys studying to be priests was incredible. Our average age of priests after this year is going to be, I think, 41. So the bulk of our guys are in their late 20s and early 30s. Like we ordained 3 years ago, we ordained 3. Last year we ordained 4. This year we ordained 5. And the year after we're ordaining 3. So like for us, that's huge. Like a diocese our size would probably usually only have 1 a year if they're lucky, or 2 maybe every other year or something like that. But I credit that. There's a lot of things. There's a handful of things. Number one, the brotherhood that we have in the priesthood. It's second to none. Like, we all like each other. And I know that sounds funny, but like, there are a lot of dioceses that do not like each other. And there's a huge rift between the younger guys who want to be orthodox and faithful and prayerful. And, then you got the older generation that's post-Vatican II crazy. And those two just they just smash. I mean, they lock horns all the time. But in our diocese, we just don't have a lot of those guys anymore. And the guys that we do have really kind of come around and seen the beauty of, like, I really believe the more Catholic you are, not in a weird way, but like, you don't have to be holier than the church, but but just like, if you can live your faith and be authentically Catholic and not be afraid of it, that is attractive right now. And I think a lot of people are afraid of doing that because of the fallout from it. I don't know. I've just found that every time I double down and just do something more Catholic, I'll just give a simple example. This year we had the Easter Vigil. I mean, everywhere we have the Easter Vigil, but this year we had the Easter Vigil, and we decided to do all of the readings, because you have the option, you can do like 3 or 5 or,
sure.
And so we did them all, and we had baptisms, we had confirmations. It was like a 3-hour liturgy, and at the end, everybody was like saying thank you. Like, it's like the first time I've ever been to an Easter Vigil where the whole thing was done like it's supposed to be done. The missal is very clear, like you should do all the readings. And so anyway, I've just been amazed that, actually I haven't been that amazed. Like, the more you get in line with Jesus, the more attractive something is. And I think so that's a really long first one. Second one is our education system. So we have 3 Catholic high schools in our diocese, and all 3 of them have 2 or 3 priests in them. And that's they can be chaplains. That was kind of how we started out, administrators, teachers, whatever, and just like good young guys that are on fire. That is so attractive for vocations. And then, finally, I think is just we have good families. North Dakota is still a kind of an untouched Orthodox sort of reservoir. And I think it's mainly because our weather sucks so bad that nobody can stay here very long. And so it keeps the riffraff out. But it also like really solidifies our families and the parishes. And I think our parishes really feel like family based. So I think those are 3 big things for the priest. And I think a lot of dioceses don't have those 3. They really don't. They're not doubling down on being Catholic. Their priests are diametrically opposed to each other, and families are being ripped apart. So you take those 3 away, you lose the heart of vocation. The heart of vocations is the family. And then out of the family, the priests influence the family, and they see that, and then the church works with the family, and boom, you have vocations. So that's, I don't know, that was my recipe when I was vocation director.
Yes, it sounds good. Funnily enough, we've got fantastic priests where I am here in London. I know not everyone is as fortunate as we are, but just recently one of our priests was giving a homily, and he talked about the number of saints in the early church, popes who had become saints in the early church, and how that has reduced since. And I just mentioned this here because he said this as part of his homily. If the priest is a saint, his parish will be holy. If the priest is holy, his parish will be good. If the priest is good, his parish will be nice. And if the priest is nice, the parish will be ungodly. This higher standard that the people look to the priest, but also this, I think that word nice is really useful, because I feel like we've become a bit of a culture of nice. We're more concerned with not offending people and being nice. And I know in some of your talks are fantastic. You are like, I could watch you all day long. You're so infectious in like, that's not a great thing to describe someone as post-COVID, but you just want to hear more and more of what you're saying. And I know you've talked about how we've kind of domesticated Jesus, and I really can recognize that in my own attention that I've paid to the gospel. And when I paid attention to the gospel, I realized he's not at all the Jesus I thought he was. So this idea of just being more concerned with being nice and this lovely, nice guy, Jesus, hasn't really helped. No,
I think it's drastically hurt us because it like dumbs down Jesus. And like if you look at like I can't remember where it is. I love the fathers of the church. They always say this. They're like somewhere in the scripture, because I'm really bad at memorizing scripture, but I know it's somewhere in the Gospels, right, where Jesus says, who do people say that I am? And they terribly underestimate him. Like some people say you're John the Baptist. Way wrong. He's so much more than that. Some people say you're Elijah, one of the prophets. Way off, right? And so I think the crowd, the world, always underestimates him. And if the church starts doing that, it is drastically dangerous. to what's going to happen to the people. It's interesting you bring up that quote. I have been looking for that quote for the longest time, and I don't know who said it. He's quoting somebody. I don't know who said it.
Yeah, he is. Maybe he says, I think he says Dom Jean-Baptiste Chautard. There's my French accent. Is that right?
I have no idea, but so I heard that quote. It's interesting how you bring it to the priesthood. I heard that quote in reference, somebody had flipped it and used it for parents.
Yeah.
Right. So if the parents are saints, the children will be holy. And I think there's such a connection between the domestic church of the laity, right?
Yeah.
And the ministerial priesthood, the ministerial church, that those two, when they go together, that's how the church grows. If one of those is lacking or way off base, it's terrible for the other one.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're both off base, then it's terrible for the church in general, which is what I think you're seeing. You're seeing both families, right? You know, it's like pulling teeth to get people to go to Sunday Mass, you know? And I'm like, you guys, Sunday Mass is the minimum. It's not the maximum, you know, like people think they're really good Christians if they go to Mass on Sunday. And I'm like, that is just like baseline foot in the door, you know, like there's so much more that we have to offer. And so little take advantage of that. And then they wonder why their kids leave the church, right? And the same with pastors, why they wonder why their people are leaving the church. Well, you're goofy. You're doing stupid stuff that it's nowhere in the liturgy. You know, I mean, like we find this stuff all over the place. Not so much anymore here, because I think we've cleaned out a lot of it. But you see it everywhere when you travel, you know, holding hands and clapping and tambourines and cymbals and liturgical dance. And it's just, you can't, I remember I heard this comedian, he's like, I can't even hang my coat on that, yet alone my soul, you know, like if I want something that is tangible, that means something, that if I'm going to give my life to, you know, it's not about fish fries. It's about self-sacrificial love. Like I'm dying for people so that they can live. That's attractive.
Yeah, it is attractive because what are you really offering that isn't already in the culture?
Exactly.
You know,
you got it.
And I think you've spoken before about the importance of silence as well. I know you've spoken about some retreats you've been on, because I suppose earlier you mentioned the Easter Vigil. And funnily enough, at the Easter Vigil just a couple of weeks ago, I just had this overwhelming, I've mentioned it in a previous interview this week, but I just had this overwhelming, like a mix of joy and sadness as I was there in the darkness, you know, that darkness of Good Friday, and then the light of Easter and the Paschal candle, which will drain through the year, you know, and empty itself, you know, that symbolism of the light emptying itself for love of us. There's so much rich symbolism, and it was so beautiful, and it so touched a place in the human heart that I just sat there thinking, I think I got home and someone messaged me saying they were out at a nightclub and sent me a video, and I just thought, man, like what do you do that touches those places that we all have? I just felt this sadness, really, that it's so rich. Our faith is so rich, and there's so much beauty, and I think we need those seasons. You know, we're not just like this. I think you said as well this idea of if we lived an authentically Catholic life and fasted when we're meant to fast and feasted when we're meant to feast, it's also a really healthy way to live, mind and body.
Absolutely. I mean, my thing is like, so we just had our clergy conference, so it's kind of our continuing ed. And we had this group called Acts 29, which is, they're phenomenal. Good. I mean, now he's kind of become a friend, but his name is Father John Riccardo. He's from Michigan. Well, I think he's one of the best preachers in America. And, but he kind of left parish ministry to do this ministry to priests. And Acts 29, I don't know if you know this, but I didn't, this is how bad so like, I'm such a loser sometimes. Like I'm sitting there like Acts 29. I'm like, what happened in Acts 29? So I grab my Bible and I open it up to Acts 29. There is no Acts 29. There's only 28 chapters in Acts. And so the idea is that we're Acts 29. We're the continuation of the Acts of the Apostles and what goes on in the church. And like, his thing was like, we have to preach the kerygma, you know, like the passion, death, and resurrection, who Jesus authentically is. We have to get people to encounter that, to see how revolutionary the gospel is and the biblical story and how different it is. Because like right now, it's just been dumbed down to say the biblical story is just another myth amongst myths. And, you know, they're basically all the same. And they're not even close, you know, not even close. The understanding of the gods of the ancient Near East were these sex fiend, you know, power hungry masters of humanity. And like, if you contrast that with the biblical God of Judeo-Christianity, it's not even close. You know, God is completely created out of love and for love and to love and by love. And like, and so like, but to get people to understand that is a very, very tricky thing to do in our day and age. But once they encounter it, they're all in. Because there's nothing authentic in our culture. There's zero authenticity. Everything is fake. And people, they feel it, they know it. So they're hungry.
They're hungry, yeah. That all in as well. That it's kind of all or nothing. You can't just give God a little bit of you. He wants you all.
Well, they try.
Yeah.
A lot of people try to do that. It just doesn't work. It's kind of an all or nothing. I don't think you can sort of halfway do it. You just can't. And I think I felt that intensely in seminary, because I was like, kind of like, I went to seminary and I was like, all right, I'm going to try this. And when it doesn't work, I'm going to get married, or, you know, I'm going to become a priest. And then, I was going to get married and then my wife would die early and then I'd become a priest. And like, you know, all these stupid things are going through your head and you're like, because I'm not all in. And there came a point, you know, when I was in seminary, it was within the first month. I remember I was in the chapel and I'm like sitting there praying. I'm like, Lord, just tell me to leave. Like, I don't really want to be here. I'm here because I think you want me to do this, but I don't really want to do this. And so just tell me to leave. And then over these years of like encountering him and through confession and spiritual direction and prayer and retreats and all this stuff, I remember very clearly on my third year of theology, when you go before the board, and the board is basically going to recommend you for orders or not. And you go in and they kind of grill you with all these questions and stuff. And I finish the questions and they say, okay, you sit out in the hallway. And I'm sitting out in the hallway and they deliberate, right? And I'm sitting there and I remember I'm like, I was in tears and I'm just like, Jesus, don't tell me to leave. Like something had changed and I had finally given my heart to it. And once I gave my heart to it, I never wanted to go back to my old life. And that's what people just don't do. They kind of sit on the fence because we're so afraid of commitment, because especially the younger generation, they've seen commitments fail all over the place. They're terrified of committing to something. And we see that even in our younger seminarians, you know, they're even cautious about committing because there's been so much failure. And so it really takes an even bigger leap of faith, I think. But once you do it and you experience it, you're free. And that's what people are longing for.
Yeah, that authentic freedom.
Mm-hmm.
What do people misunderstand about freedom, do you think? How do they understand it, and what they got wrong?
You know, like my confirmation class is a classic example. I said to them, like, how would you define freedom? And they're like, to do whatever you want. And I'm like, do you understand, by that definition, you negate my freedom? Because if you can do whatever you want, that means you're free to take my car. But that takes away my freedom to drive my car because you just took it. So freedom can't be the ability to do whatever I want. It's got to be something else. And helping them kind of understand of like, to do what we should, like to do what we ought. And then what is what we ought? What God has revealed to us. Those aren't laws of restriction. Those are laws of freedom. And I think that is a common misconception in the modern Christian's head. When they look at the Catholic Church and they look at our law, our rules, right? All of our rules, that it's super restrictive and it's taking away my fun. When in fact, it's the complete opposite. It is enhancing your life. It's enhancing your fun. It's protecting you from the danger of sin. It's letting you be authentically free to do the good and to not wake up in the morning and feel like crap and say, what did I do last night? Why did I do it? Like, the world has, and the devil has convinced us that it's the opposite, that it's these restricted things that ruin lives, instead of Christ is like, no, these are here to save your life, to enhance your life.
Yeah, you that's absolutely true. You've talked about this idea of you don't see what I see.
Right.
Yeah, can you tell us a bit about that? Because I think, again, it's this trick the devil plays on us, that if we live a certain way, we think we're being free, we're going out, we're drinking, going to clubs, nobody's going to oppress me or stop me doing what I want, that we're going to be happy, but then you see things that maybe we don't.
Well, I see the end result of that, right? Like most people don't. They see the idiots, going out and partying and doing keg stands and jumping off balconies into pools and all that. And for the record, like Thomas Aquinas said, that we have to admit that sin is enjoyable. Like, that's why people do it, right? If it wasn't enjoyable, people wouldn't do it. The problem is not the pleasure of sin, it's what it does to your heart. And that's what people don't understand. Like, even that pleasure they're experiencing of jumping off balconies, drunk out of their mind, like, one day that they're going to look back at that and they're going to see nothing but pain. They're not going to see joy. They're going to see pain because of the decisions they made. And now the end of that is, they're alcoholics and they're sitting in my office and they've train wrecked their lives. They're divorced. Their kids hate them. They've lost their job, all in the name of partying, right? It just went too far. And that's what sin does. Sin starts out fun and then it gets out of control. And once you're out of control, there's nothing you can do about it. And it's too late. Now, again, from a Christian perspective, we'd say it's never too late. Christ can always fix and undo what's been done and actually make it better than if you hadn't done it at all, right? But yeah, so I see a lot of things. I see, a lot of people, like in high school, college, all they see is the promiscuity, right? Everybody's sleeping with each other, having a great time, hooking up as much as they can, talking about their trophies, about all their, escapades. They don't, but what I see the woman that's sitting in my office that had an abortion and that wants to kill herself right now, right? Nobody sees that. They just see the club scene. They don't see the couple that sits in my office, that because he partied so much and she was so promiscuous during college, that they're on the verge of divorce after 2 years of marriage. Nobody sees that, right? Nobody wants to publicly say, hey, look at us, we failed, right? They do it in the privacy of this office. Everybody you'll see, like making fun of a kid at school and everybody's laughing and hitting them on the head or whatever. And that's what everybody sees. But they don't see is the kid sitting in my office wanting to blow his brains out because he's been tortured and bullied for so long. You don't see. I see that. One of the other ones I say is that, like, you don't see a possessed person. Like, I've seen possessed people. I've been in exorcisms. I know what that's like. It's miserable. And again, the culture is put into our head that somehow evil is kind of fun. I always tell kids, like when I'm teaching at high school or college, I'm like, you guys really believe the lie that in order to really have fun, there has to be just a little bit of evil. Maybe not a lot, but just a little bit. And you really believe that. You believe that you can't just have an enjoyable good time and just living for Jesus. When in fact, St. Augustine says, right, he says, love God and then do whatever you want. Because if you love God, you're never going to hurt him. And you're free to do whatever. Whereas the opposite, right, is just sin enslaves. St. Paul says it, the wages of sin is death. The wages of sin is death. I mean, we just recently my confirmation kids, they're on a hockey team, and one of their players, this 8th grader, she tried to commit suicide. She's out in Minneapolis right now on a ventilator. They're trying to bring her back. And it's because of sin. It's the wages of sin. She's completely alone. She had nothing. Here's another one. People see all the time, like, oh, they're, sending pictures of each other. And I didn't realize how big of a problem like sexting is.
Yeah.
It's incredible. I was talking to some of these girls, they're 8th graders. And I'm like, how often does this happen? Because they were really confiding in me. And they're like, I don't know, once or twice a week. I'm like, once or twice a week, you're being asked for pictures? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, why don't you bring this to the administration? And they're like, because they won't do anything. And if we bring it to the administration, then they know that we tried to get them in trouble and they do everything they can to destroy our lives. And you said earlier, education's a mess. It's not a mess. It's a nightmare right now.
Yeah.
The public system is an absolute nightmare. And the private system is, man, if we don't start really stepping up to the plate, we're just going to follow suit and we're not going to be any different. But there's a ton of things that people don't see. My last one, people don't see so people see all the, money and power and fame and all this stuff, right? Like they don't see the people that are sitting in my office that are wealthy beyond belief, that have everything they could possibly have. And they are miserable. They're like crying, telling me that they'd be willing to give it all away if they could just get their family back, because they were so focused on their fame and fortune, they forgot about their relationships and they lost what was most important. Nobody sees that. All we see are the idiots driving, Bentleys, throwing $100 bills out the top, screaming money ain't a thing. And I got to have bigger houses and bigger toys and more stuff. None of that means anything. None of it if you have nobody to share it with. We are built for relationship. And so if you don't have relationships, you can have everything in the world. You're going to be the most miserable person on the planet. And that's what nobody sees. They just see the lie of the culture, the materialistic culture saying, this is going to make you happy. And if it's going to make us so dang happy, why is everybody so freaking miserable right now? That's the question I have. We have the utopia. I just read this article. It's actually somebody sent me this article. It said for the third consecutive year in a row that life expectancy in America has gone down, which is it's unbelievable to think about. The last time that happened? 1918. You know what happened in 1918? World War I and the Spanish flu. You know what's happened in 2022? Everybody's like, oh, it was COVID. No, it wasn't COVID. These deaths that are causing the life expectancy to go down are called deaths by despair. Mm-hmm. They are suicides, they're drug overdoses, and they're liver cirrhosis. That's what is killing us right now, which is, how is that? The number one killer in America of 18 to 24-year-olds is fentanyl overdose. The number one killer of 24 to 34-year-olds in America is liver cirrhosis, which is caused by alcoholism. So really, everybody's happy? Everything's great? We are being sold the biggest lie that maybe has ever been sold. And people just keep falling for it. And you just keep throwing seeds. And these confirmation girls are a prime example. We started out about halfway through the year, they were like, this is awesome. We really want to try to be better. And I'm like, great, what do you want to do? And they're like, can you teach us how to pray? I'm like, yeah, you got to show up early though. So 20 minutes before confirmation class, they came, met me in the church. I had anywhere from 8 to 15 kids would show up and we'd pray together. And I'd teach them, composition of place, imaginative prayer, Lectio Divina, the Divine Mercy Chaplet, the Rosary. I'd let them, they didn't have to kneel, or prostrate on the marble floor. I said, sit wherever you want, get comfortable, and just encounter the Lord. Let him touch your heart. Let him just be with him like you'd be with a friend. They loved it. Now, is that going to be enough? No. They're going to have to stay in touch with me. I'm going to have to stay in touch with them. We're going to have to keep working because it's just constant. It's just being jammed on their throat and they know it and they hate it, but they fall for it. It's the most bizarre thing you could ever think of.
It's really a struggle, isn't it? I still work in education, and the thing is, it's true in a weird way. We're in a time where we're so scientistic, scientism, that if it's evidence-based, I'm all for it, and I'm not interested in something that can't be empirically proved or whatever. But at the same time, when you say to these young people, look, the evidence bears it out. The evidence bears it out that the suicide rates and rates of depression and addiction are always highest amongst the wealthiest populations. And the most primitive, so-called primitive, simple people who aren't wealthy always report the highest levels of happiness. And you say, look, the evidence show this is not my opinion. And still, even knowing that, they, I find there's just this desire to just get wealth. We just want to, yeah, okay, miss, but come on, we just
right.
Like everyone wants money.
Mm-hmm.
I say, of course you want money, but where are you placing that? Or
to what end? There's nothing wrong with being a successful businessman or woman. There's nothing wrong with having stuff, but what is your end in all that? Like, are you detached from it? Are you able to live free with it? Or is it something that just consumes you? Because that's gonna tie your hands too. I always say, I don't know if you remember, I don't know how old you are, but I always kind of date myself
45.
with okay, we're about the same age. So like, you remember, this is UK, this is America, but Biggie Smalls, the notorious B.I.G. I mean, he was a rapper back in like the 90s.
I know who you mean, yeah.
I quote him all the time, like in homilies and talks, because he had a great line, and it was so true. And he was super wealthy, living the dream of the rapper world, and his line was, more money, more problems. Only he said it better. He said, mo money, mo problems, right? But it's true. Yeah. The more you have, the more problems you have. And I just don't, if you ever get a chance, I know I talk about this all the time too, but there is one of the greatest things I have ever seen on this very topic is somebody who I used to hate. Well, hate's a strong word. I really didn't like, and I have grown to have a great appreciation for, because I've learned more about him, is Tom Brady, the quarterback of the New England Patriots, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers now. He is a fascinating man. But when he was like, I don't know, I think it was after he had won 3 or 4 Super Bowls, and he was like king of the football world. He was the man. He had just married Giselle, who's a Victoria's Secret supermodel. He had like private jets that would fly him to games. He had houses all over the place. He had an $80 million something like contract with the New England Patriots. He was the king. Not to mention, he was like on his way to be the greatest quarterback ever. They do a 60 minutes interview with him, and you can watch it. It's on YouTube. It is fascinating. So they're sitting here with this young Tom Brady, king of quarterbacks, king of the NFL. And they're like, what's it like, Tom? And he's like, I didn't think it came with all the baggage. And they're like, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, it's like, I can't go out to eat. I can't like just hang out with my family. Like, it's always people around me. And yeah, I got all this money and all this stuff. And the guy's like, but Tom, you're like at the top. This is everything you've ever wanted. And he looks back at the camera and he's like, you're right. And a lot of people would probably say to me, Tom, like, you've reached the top, the pinnacle, you're everything. Me, I'm like, God, there's got to be more than this. And the interviewer's like, well, what is it, Tom? And he's like, I wish I knew. I wish I knew. And I'm like watching it. I'm like, Tom, you just said it. You're like, God, I wish I knew. And here's the crazy part. Tom Brady was raised Catholic. He should know better. But that, I think that encapsulates, I use that in talks wherever I go. That interview, because everybody knows who Tom Brady is. And that interview, I'm like, Tom Brady has everything the American dream can offer. And he is not happy.
Yeah.
Or maybe he's happy, but he is not fulfilled. Something's missing. So what is it? And I think a lot of young people can get in line with that. They get it. They get what's going on in his heart, I think. So I don't, and then here's the thing. Guess what happened to Tom Brady? He retired, right? No, he didn't. He's back. He's playing another year. Why? Because Tom Brady's God is football. And he can't let it go. Because without football, he has no identity.
Right.
That is his identity. And that's terribly sad. It's terribly sad. And maybe Tom will figure it out. I pray for him occasionally. I'm like, Lord, just because if Tom Brady would figure it out and come back to the faith, that would be a big wake-up call for a lot of people, maybe. So I don't know. He's a fascinating guy, though.
Yeah, that's an interesting example. And I'll be honest, I'm not particularly I don't know a lot about sport.
That's all right.
Let alone American sport. What does he play? Baseball?
No, football. Oh. Tom Brady is the greatest football player of all time, probably. Well, greatest quarterback of all time.
Yeah, I knew that. I did know that. So, but even if I didn't, then I get the point. Yeah, he's got it all. So here's someone who's got it all, and it's not enough. And so what does he do? He goes back to what wasn't working.
Right.
Yeah.
It actually reminds me of, and you could draw so many parallels to this, but like my new thing that I've really been focusing on, because it's Easter season, and one of my favorite chapters in the entire Bible is John 21. Like John 21 is probably the most insightful, full chapter on the human person and sin and forgiveness that exists maybe in the entire Bible. But you have, right, because Peter's sitting there, he's denied the Lord, right? And he hasn't dealt with that yet. And so what does he do? He goes back to his old life. He's like, I'm not going to deal with this. I'm just going to go back to fishing. I'm going to go fish. And I'm like, fish? You haven't fished for 3 years. Jesus told you you're not a fisherman anymore. You're a fisher of men. And I heard this guy talking about this. And he said, why did Peter go back to fishing? Because he believed that he blew it so badly in denying God, calling down a curse upon himself in saying that he didn't know Jesus, right? He blew it so badly that there was no way that Jesus was still going to stay faithful to those promises he made to him. That you're the rock, you're the church, the gates of hell will not prevail against it. He couldn't possibly be that guy anymore after what he had done and how badly he had screwed everything up. And so he said, you know what? I blew my entire life. So I'm going back to my old life. What happens that night? He doesn't catch anything. Why? Because he's not a fisherman anymore. That's why. He's not supposed to be fishing. And then there's this amazing scene, right? When they catch the big thing of fish. Peter dives in the water. He's like swimming forward. He gets up and it says, he looks and he sees Jesus, and then he sees a charcoal fire. There's only one other place in the entire scriptures where the words charcoal fire is used, and it's 3 chapters prior. And it's when he's standing around a charcoal fire warming himself, and he denies Jesus 3 times. So you got to think that Jesus built that fire. He could have built it out of wood. He built it out of charcoal so that Peter would know that Jesus knew what he had done, and it was okay. And that's what God wants to do to every single person, because it's an image of us. We blow it all the time. We screw things up all the time. Sometimes we blow it really badly. And we're like, surely God doesn't even love me anymore. My family doesn't even, the friends don't love me. But there is always mercy. And that is the story of Easter. There is always mercy. Again, one more time, like when he shows the apostles, it says he shows up and he says, peace be with you. Like, you want to talk about the weirdest greeting ever? They just denied him, ran away from him, and caused him to be killed. And when Jesus shows up, I love the line because it says, they were shocked and terrified. Like, I would use like expletives there. Like, could you imagine what that would have been like? And what are the first words that Jesus says? He doesn't say, you freaking losers. How could you do this? He says, peace. Peace be with you. Then he shows him his wounds to say, you did this. And then he says it again. It's okay. Be at peace, because I forgive everything. Like, our human minds, we just can't wrap them around divine forgiveness. It is so much more than we could ever possibly imagine. And so few people ever touch it. And that's why everybody is going back to fishing, going back to their old life, trying to recapture the glory days of college, trying to go back and, get back to my 20s, man, when I was in best shape of my life. They can't move on because they haven't been forgiven. I really believe that is a huge block right now in the church, and it's killing us. Like, what gives Peter his power on Pentecost morning? Yeah, it's the Holy Spirit, but he was forgiven. This is why I truly believe, like, I am convinced that Judas was meant to be the greatest apostle of them all. Because if you think about it, like, Peter and Judas did the same thing, more or less. They both denied him. But if Judas would have come back and received the forgiveness of Jesus, could you imagine him and Peter as a missionary team?
Mm-hmm.
They would go into towns and be like, people would be like, man, I did this, this, and this. And they're like, really? Because we denied him to his death and he forgave both of us losers. Don't you think he can forgive you? I mean, imagine the power that those two guys would have. That's why Peter had so much power, was because of the mercy he had received. And Judas would have been even more powerful, but he couldn't receive it. And those are the two, that's the split, right? Those that receive mercy and what they can do, and those that refuse mercy and what happens to them.
Yeah.
That's why I love the Bible. It's all over the place. Everything's in there.
Yeah. And that's hell, I guess. That's hell.
Yeah.
People have asked me, how can you believe in a God that will just throw you in hell? And this sort of cruel, vengeful God. I said, you don't understand. We need to go back a bit. Let's not begin there. But that we choose, that we won't allow ourselves to be loved. God doesn't ever stop loving us, but will we allow ourselves to be loved?
Mm-hmm.
And I was just watching Les Miserables recently, and and I think that is so well done. The way in which Javert cannot accept mercy, he just can't. He takes his own life, and in a merciful act, Jean Valjean can, and it transforms his life. Right. I just think that, it's so true that I hadn't really thought about it like that, but the way you say it is, do you think that's at the root of why people are staying away from God, is ultimately because they don't feel worthy of God's forgiveness? Do you think?
I think it's twofold. I think it's they don't feel worthy of God's forgiveness, and the reason they don't feel worthy of God's forgiveness is because of what you just said, because they see him as a vengeful, malevolent judge that is just waiting for you to screw up so he can send you to hell. Like, we don't understand how much, like, we just had this conference I was talking about, like, this guy that came in and spoke, Father John Ricardo. I just want to give you just the thing that he touched on was so amazing. He's like, all right, so I want you just to think about creation, right? Because it says God so loved the world that he sent his only son, right? And why? Why did he send his only son? And it's because he loves his creation, but he loves us because we're the pinnacle of his creation. And he's like, I just want to put that in context for you, okay? He said, there are 90 billion light years. That's how wide the universe is, they estimate. 90 billion light years. A light year is 5.8 trillion miles. So 90 billion times 5.8 trillion is, I can't remember, I think it's 522 septillion miles. And that's 522 with 21 zeros behind it.
Right.
He says, in this 522 septillion mile universe, there are 2 trillion galaxies, not stars, galaxies. And in those galaxies, each one, there is anywhere from 200 to 800 billion stars. We are one star and one planet. And all of that out there, he made effortlessly. And it doesn't, when it comes to us, none of that matters. He wants us. He's like, and then he got into, he's like, I was just fascinated by it. I love this kind of stuff. But he's like, so our sun, okay, we can fit roughly 1 million Earths into our sun, okay? And we're a relatively small star. The biggest star they've ever recorded in the universe is a variable hypergiant. You can fit 4.2 quadrillion Earths into this one star. To give you an idea how big that is, if I had you count from 1 to 1 million in seconds, so 1, 2, it would take you 13 days. To get to 1 billion, it would take 31 years. To get to 1 trillion, it would take 31,000 years. To get to a quadrillion, it would take 31 million years to count to a quadrillion. There are 7 quadrillion Earths can fit into this one flippin' star. And God made that effortlessly. Yeah. God did that, and it means really nothing to him. But us, he didn't send his son to die for a variable hypergiant star. He sent his son to die for us. If there is anything, the 2 things that people need to hear right now more than anything is mercy and love. That is our God. And that doesn't mean that he just lets you do whatever you want because he's all merciful. He doesn't let Peter get away with what he's done, right? He says, you got to counter it. And what does he do to Peter for the 3 denials? It's the 3 professions of faith. So he's got, and then the best part is he's like, Peter, do you love me? He's like, yeah, I love you. He's like, feed my sheep. So Peter, you love me? Do something about it. Show me you love me. Take care of my church. Feed my lambs. And then he has that great, like the final part of John 21. When you were young, you used to act like a child and do things the way you wanted. When you get older, somebody's going to take you where you don't want to go. But by that, you will glorify me. And the final line of the entire chapter, follow me. And following him indicates that you live like him. And in doing that is when you experience the fullness of mercy and the fullness of love, and everything has meaning. Everything changes. That's the glory of the gospel. That's the difference that it makes in people's lives. And that's what people need to hear. I'm convinced of it.
Yeah. What are we doing wrong that they're not hearing it?
Well, part of it is we're billboards, right?
Yeah.
So when they look at us, they're like, and Paul says it, you're ambassadors for Christ. And they're like, they see the guy, he's up front. Everybody knows he's like a serial adulterer, but he's up front every Sunday in mass. And everybody's like, well, if that hypocrite is your Catholic, your new man, I don't want anything to do with this. Kids looking at their parents like, you got to go to CCD. And then when they go to CCD, the parents go out to the bar and they come back and pick them up and they never go to Sunday mass. Kids are saying, why would I do this? This is making no effect in your life. Why would it make any effect in my life?
Yeah.
So we're obviously not modeling it well enough. We're not witnessing to it well enough. But also trying to get people to say, look, don't compare yourself to me. I'm gonna let you down. I'm a broken idiot human. Like, I love Jesus and I'm trying, but I make mistakes all the time. Don't put your faith on me. Put your faith on Jesus. And if you want to see how you're doing, measure yourself to him. Like, we're all, G.K. Chesterton said it best, right? We're all in a boat and we're all sick together. Like, we're all seasick because we're a mess. We're all a mess. But he's the hope. And if we can just rally around the heart of Christ and let that heart be the thing that we judge ourselves on, I think we're going to have a lot. But we live in a culture, right? Where I remember who said that, but like, everything is allowed and nothing is forgiven.
Yeah.
So there is no mercy. There's no mercy for anybody. You do anything wrong, you're immediately.
We don't see much of it. We don't see much of it. Everything, I've kind of switched off a bit from the news because it's just quite bleak, of course. But it's just one whole blame game. Everything is right. Just, who can I blame? Who can I lay my problems at? Why am I in this mess? And there's not enough looking within. I think everything's external. Like whose fault is it?
Yeah. I mean, and that's the story of original sin, right? When God comes to Adam, he's like, did you eat from the tree? He's like, Eve told me to do it.
Yeah.
And he's like, Eve, did you eat from the tree? He's like, oh, the snake told me to do it. Like, they're just passing the blame. Nobody's admitting to what's wrong here so that it can be healed.
And it feels like it feels like sometimes the way we want to present our faith is as a code of ethics and nothing more. So I see that in some of just people I encounter, and they say, look, if you're giving to the poor and you're helping the homeless and you're raising money for charity, you're donating to CAFOD, then it shows what a good Christian you are. And these things are good, and they do show that you're a good Christian. But I think if we reduce what we've got to just a code of ethics, like, it has to be worship first, doesn't it? It has to be, because everything else will then follow.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that,
well, it has to be encounter.
Yeah.
you have to encounter the living God, and then everything will make sense. Like that is one thing that Pope Francis said that I did find rather profound. You know, I think everybody kind of like crucified him for it. They crucified him for a lot of stuff, but like when he was talking about, I remember how he said it, but it was something like, we can't be talking about all these moral issues like abortion and all these things. Like, we have to have people encounter Christ first. Like, experiencing his love is the most important thing. And everybody's like, oh my gosh, like, he's pro-abortion. I'm like, wait, like, whoa, like, I don't think he said that. And yes, there's some stuff that he does say that I'm a little confused on, but like, at the same time, like, that sentiment was right. You cannot go out preaching the moral law of the church, this ethical code, if there's no love for the one who gave it. Otherwise, nobody's going to follow it, right? I mean, why do you stay true to your spouse? Because you made promises to them, because you love them. And you're going to, like, I oftentimes at weddings, I'm like, John and Lisa, I'm like, John, do you need the commandment, thou shalt not murder thy bride? And he's, everybody's laughing. He's like, no, I don't need that. I'm like, why not? He's like, well, because I love her. And I'm like, but it is a commandment, thou shalt not murder. He's like, yeah. And I'm like, but you don't need it. And you know why you don't need that commandment? Because you love. And that's what Augustine meant when he said, love God and do whatever you will. Because if you love this code of ethics, it's not a code of ethics. It's a guide to love. And it means something to you. And you want to hang on to it and practice it.
And what is love? That I mean, I can't just ask you what is love and then expect you to answer in 2 seconds. But the reason the reason that I wanted to do this idea of choose agape is because I feel like it's such a misunderstood and misused word, that it's like you said, that idea of love is calling someone to something higher. But I don't feel like that's how people understand it in the culture.
No, I mean, you have agape, and I mean, you obviously know the storge, eros, philios, the different types of love for the Greeks, and agape was the greatest, right? But we've literally taken this massive thing that we call love, and it's huge. It's bigger than the 90 billion light years of the galaxy, and we've reduced it to eros. Right, which is the physical attraction, erotic, right? That's where we get that word from, that physical intimacy. Like, we have reduced this massive concept that is the greatest thing that human beings can do. We've reduced it to physical intimacy. And if that's it, then we're in a lot of trouble. And you're going to see the suicide rates go through the roof. You're going to watch depression and mental illness go through the roof. Because the greatest thing that we can do as human beings is love. And if we have diminished it down to physical intimacy, we are going to be so empty. It's going to be awful. But that's what we've done. And everybody's like, how did this happen? I'm like, well, we let it happen. All of us. And especially the church. We let it happen. We just did it little by little. And we just stood by and let it happen. And now everybody's like, we got to fix it. Well, now it's going to take saints.
Yeah, saints, that's the answer. I was rewatching Friends, much to my husband's chagrin recently, because he absolutely hates it and can't believe that I watch it. But I suppose it's just a throwback to my youth.
Right.
But,
nostalgia.
Yeah, and I know it's mostly trite, but it's just funny watching like that relationship where you've got Ross and Rachel, and she ends up pregnant with his baby, and they're really good friends, and she's going to have his baby, and they have this conversation where he just says, like, I can't marry you, and she says, no, don't marry me, because we're not in love. But they really like each other, and they're about to have a child, but they both agree that the morally right thing to do is not to get married, because they're not in that place. And this place, you know, anyone who knows Friends, this place comes and goes and comes and goes throughout the whole.
Right.
It's like, so, and I thought that's just so indicative of what we, when I teach about marriage to the students, they actually say, oh, like when marriage was invented, first of all, like it's something invented, not by God. When marriage was invented, you just, people lived shorter. So no one really thinks that they're going to be able to stay with someone for 40 or 50 years anymore. Like, you expect to get married and then get divorced. And that's the expectation. Right. And I feel like we're meeting people's expectations. We're saying, we expect you to go out and to have sex casually. So here's some condoms. Yeah, we expect that marriages won't last. So we'll make divorce easier to get out. We'll make marriage easier to get out of than a phone contract. So we have these really low expectations. And then what happens? Well, what do you expect?
Right. Yeah, I've always found that, like, when I taught at the high school and at the university, and wherever you hold the bar is where, that's how high the kids will rise. So if you hold it really low, that's all the higher they're going. And I think it was Michelangelo. He said, it's not that human beings have too high of expectations and they shoot for it and miss it. It's that we have too low of expectations and we always hit them. Like, that's what's killing humanity. Like, and that's why, like, you know, when it was a very more Christian society, right, that it was, you had more grandiose sort of ideals that people were shooting for, and heaven being on the top of the list. And you wouldn't get that in this life. And so you just kept working and working and working for it and try to get better and better and better. But now it's like, I want to be famous, or I want to be rich, and I want to marry a super hot girl, or, you know, a really handsome guy. And then you get it. And what happens? It's over. And then what? And, you know, you don't have it. We have these, we don't have the great hope anymore. We have all these little hopes, and we hit those all the time. But the great hope, which is eternal life, like, that's just off of people's radars. And that's what's really indicative of you know, these deaths by despair, to bring it full circle, kind of, is there's just nothing inside of people anymore.
Because we've lost that final purpose, that final telos. Everything's about your efficient cause, your material cause. You've lost that idea of, like you say, looking to the bigger picture. And it's funny because with academia, we want to stretch them. We want to say, you can do more than you think. But then in the moral life, we don't. So there's like, which is more important ultimately? There's work to be done. I'm gonna draw it to a close, and thank you so much for your time, Father.
Absolutely.
And I would love to talk with you again, because my list is just, I almost didn't know where to go, because I've got so many notes about so many things you've said. And I would just say to anyone, go and check out your homilies and your YouTube videos, because honestly, we need to hear voices like yours in the culture, and it's just really powerful. So keep doing what you're doing. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Enjoyed it.
Good. Well, thank you.